Well, the election is getting more exciting, at least for me, because we were able to have a little victory for freedom of the press and get access to the leaders' debate, where our own reporter, Cian Bexley, asked 6 questions of 3 different leaders, including the Prime Minister himself. Our friend, Andrew Lawton, also got 2 questions into the Prime Minister, and I mention him because he too needed a court injunction to break down the barriers that had been put up by the Debates Commission. Let me just refresh your memory of the question that Cian Bexley asked of Justin Trudeau, and this was at the debate on Monday night.
Hi, Mr. Trudeau. Since your multiple use of blackface became an international scandal, Canada's international reputation has been irreparably harmed. Have you reached out to any African leaders or any leaders from the Middle East to apologize for your conduct?
Canada will continue to engage in a positive, constructive way around the world, standing up for human rights, engaging with leaders right around the world, because we know that promoting our values and prosperity for everyone around the world is good for Canadians and creates better opportunities for everyone.
So that didn't answer the question at all. Have you spoken to any African leaders or leaders from the Middle East to apologize for your personal conduct?
I have continued to engage with leaders around the world in a responsible way during an election campaign. My focus is connecting with Canadians, as I was able to tonight. And I was very pleased to see so many of the questions turn to the environment. In all sections, there was a clear contrast between those on stage who don't think we should be fighting climate change and those of us who do. And again, we are the only party with a clear plan to fight climate change.
Well, that was a good one. Trudeau did not answer. Just very quickly, let me show you the question asked by our friend Andrew Lawton that went directly to freedom of the press. Take a look at that.
Good evening, Prime Minister. Andrew Lawton from True North. This afternoon, a federal court judge ruled that I had a right to be here to cover this debate as a journalist, despite opposition from your Attorney General. This comes after 2 weeks of me being kicked out of or not allowed into your campaign rallies. The Conservatives have criticized you for being not as advertised. You've advertised yourself as a champion of press freedom. Will you take a stand right now, sir, as the leader of the Liberal Party and allow me to cover your campaign like every other journalist?
We are a party and we are a country that respects journalistic rights and respects the freedom of the press. We will continue to.
So is that a yes, sir?
We are a party and a country that respects the hard work and the freedom of the press, and we will continue to.
Then what time is your plane leaving tomorrow, sir?
So that's what happened on Monday night, but I have to say, we didn't think those journalists would make it in at all because it was an uphill legal battle to convince the federal court to give us an emergency injunction. Well, speaking of injunctions and things like that, and politics and debates, may I introduce to you my friend Manny Montenegrino, who has a lot to say. Manny, great to see you again.
Great to see you, and congratulations. You did so much for journalism, the law this week. It's unfortunate that the debate on Monday overshadowed your great work. But this story that you have done is a huge story, and unfortunately, it was overshadowed by the debate. But congratulations, Ezra and Andrew. Great job.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for that, Manny. Obviously, a lot of credit goes to the lawyers who did a really good job, and of course, our donors, because we had to come up with the dough to pay a retainer to the firm very quickly. Manny, just let me quickly say, and then I'll turn things back to you. When I hired our lawyers, they warned me that it was going to be an uphill battle because getting an emergency injunction like that, they told me, is difficult, and I know it's true. So I assumed we would lose, but we would die trying. To win, that just made it feel great, but there was no one there in the room to celebrate with. It was us and the True North News, that's Candace Malcolm's team and Andrew Lawton, but there were no civil liberties groups, there were no other media companies, and I felt like we should have had 10 allies in the room, but no one was there, Manny.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why you are correct. And your lawyer was probably correct by saying it's almost impossible to win when the natural allies are not there in court. And as I understand it, Ezra, you had the Attorney General, who is supposed to be on the sideline and not have any dog in the race, actually giving argument against freedom of speech and freedom of press. So it is remarkable that you won, but tells you something else. It tells you something about this newly created Debates Commission.
Yeah. Well, Manny, we are not done with the Debates Commission because this was just an emergency injunction to get us in. But we still have a larger, more methodical, less rushed judicial review of their treatment of us that I want to continue to proceed. So in some ways it's moot because we're in the debates, but I think we still ought to have a court review the shenanigans because I want to expose what I sense in my bones is collusion between the supposedly independent commission and the Trudeau government.
Yeah, and you know what, Ezra? When your case was finally decided, it gave me a support of what I have been feeling about the Debates Commission itself. And so let me go through it. First of all, Ezra, we start right from the beginning. Why is Justin Trudeau creating a Debates Commission, and can we trust him? On anything. So I start there. And clearly, he has no credibility. He's been found to be not credible by a judge, the ethics commissioner, basically a liar when he said the Aga Khan was his friend, and the Debates Commission, the ethics commissioner said, no, I don't accept that. That's pretty damning. We start there. Then we add to that, what has happened to the Canadian institutions while Justin Trudeau has been Prime Minister? Well, we've seen the biggest, the non-biased institution is the Privy Council of Canada. Unprecedented, he had to quit. Michael Wernick quit because he felt that he can no longer do his duties because there's an apprehension of bias. Then we've seen bias in the media. I don't need to go into that, the $600 million and offering and so on. We've seen bias by this government and and corruption with respect to the charging of Admiral Norman. We've seen the RCMP stymied. So when I start my analysis of what about this Debates Commission, I start, well, there's a good chance I'm going to see either bias or I'm going to see an apprehension of bias because every institution in Canada, I mean, even the judiciary was seen to be thrown under the bus, the Manitoba judge that the PMO decided to attack. So let
me add in the independent senators too, the so-called independent senators, because I saw a study, believe it or not, it was published in the CBC, which shocked me, that showed these so-called independent senators actually vote more in lockstep with Trudeau than even partisan Liberal senators do, which is hard to believe.
Yeah. Exactly, and I was coming to that. So
I didn't mean to jump ahead, but
no. There's so many, Ezra. So I start with the premise. I start and say there's a good chance the Debates Commissioner starts in the soup of bias or in the apprehension of bias, and then we go on. The very first thing, and the Canadian public was right to comment on, how is it possible that there are 5 moderators that are all female when we are trying to strive for gender parity? So that was one of the first things that brought to my attention, saying, well, that looks odd. That doesn't seem right for an unbiased, and especially a Debates Commissioner that's seeking no apprehension of bias. Right off the gun, we have what appears to be at least a concern by the Canadian public that was never addressed. I mean, I think of there are incredible. I mean, the person who is found broke many stories. A male that hasn't been invited. So it starts there.
Right.
The second thing I thought of, and this is really disturbing because it's 2019. Why was the debate held at 7 p.m.? When people in BC are at work and people in Alberta are on their way home from work,
right.
Basically 30% of Canadians could not or would not be able to see on a regular basis as Eastern Canada did. That says to me, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Why? What's the purpose of that? Clearly, we know that the debate could have been at 9 o'clock Eastern time, and everyone would have at least been able to see it in Canada.
Yeah.
And I found that to add to my pattern of concern.
Yeah.
The other thing that I looked at very carefully, very carefully was who was admitted into the debate. And there were 3 criteria. And Ezra, as a lawyer, I read the 3 criteria. They were very simplistic. And they basically, all you had to do is meet 2 of the 3. And if you go through the criteria, they're very simplistic, and I'll be very simple. You had to be elected in the brand that you're running. You have to have at least 300 people running, or you had to have a viability, a strong viability of electing some members. So that basically, I thought the bar was so low that it would include anyone. It would include certainly the People's Party, but Maxime did not qualify. He only met 1. And then so he was ruled out. And then the debates commissioner then takes an appeal, and I looked into it very carefully. There seemed to have been, and as the debates commissioner did in your case, he downloaded his responsibility to a pollster to say, well, what's a possibility? Could you win five seats? Well, the pollster, and I looked at the question, I looked at the polls, it was nowhere near any other polls that are out there. And so it got me some concern. Well, wait a minute. It's not in the 3 criteria. It's not 2 of the 3 criteria. So it seemed that the debates commissioner was moving the yardsticks again. And it didn't seem like, again, I felt there was an apprehension of bias to include. So that was the 3rd. And then I looked at your case very carefully. And not only was it wrong in law, not only was it wrong in the principles of freedom of the press, but the way they handled it and the way they downloaded it. They gave you the decision on Friday. Everybody knows that by Monday it is an impossibility unless lawyers, and I've done this, work through the weekend, and your lawyers did that. God bless them. And they did that because they strategically knew that if you put it on Friday, Ezra will not be in court. But they don't know Ezra, unfortunately. So now, Ezra, a little bit, I'm not going to give you some legal advice here, but when there's this type of egregious behavior by a litigant, courts not only order costs, but they should be ordering punitive or soliciting their own client costs. When I practice law, it's very hard to get that. But when you put a person to the onus on Friday for a hearing that has to be heard by Monday, and it was done intentionally, you should be able to get punitive costs for that egregious behavior. So when I look at these 4 or 5 patterns, I sit there and say, and it's clear. And in your case, they downloaded. I looked at Justice Zinn's questions and how he basically said, well, did you make the decision yourself, the basic commissioner? No, we kind of let somebody else do it.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't just somebody else. It was giving it back to the government. So the government said you're independent. They used that word so many times. But the actual decision, the so-called independent group checked with the government, gave it to the government.
And that's the case in everything that we talked about, the corruption of all our bureaucracies. I mean, the clerk of the Privy Council, I got to check with the government. No, your job is to protect the bureaucracy. Can you imagine the trial that Admiral Norman went through? We got to check with the government.
Right.
In fact, Ezra, I forget the exact words, but the judge in that case said, well, it looks like the private prosecutor is run by the PMO. And that was a verbatim arbiter statement in open court. And so everything checks through this government. So it is folly to think, and especially when I read your case, and I didn't read the whole decision, Ezra, but clearly the debates commissioner falls into that group. And what that has done is, I mean, there's a lot of things that are important in Canada, and certainly elections are extremely important, and the right of the media to be there is extremely important. But to have at least the apprehension of bias or evidence of liberal bias by the debates commissioner, I think there's a strong case, and I'm at 5 points in my pattern. And believe me, as time will go on, Ezra, we'll see more as you appeal this and as you'll dig into the facts. It clearly was just an arm of the PMO pretty much like the trial of Admiral Norman was an arm of the PMO. So there's a whole pattern of it, Ezra. And, I wish I was around arguing your case, because you are going to succeed. And I would, Ezra, you look at all the pattern that Canadians, I think you have to not only stand up for yourself and every journalist who wasn't there for you, but you have to stand up in your argument for every independent institution in Canada that's seen itself corrupted by this government. You have to be the voice as well for that. Sorry for putting so much burden on you, but we need somebody, Ezra.
Manny, I remember, and it was a dozen years ago, more even, when the Human Rights Commission came for me for publishing the Danish cartoons of Mohammed. And I remember saying to my friends, and that was the start of a whole bunch of things in my life I didn't even know were going to come, that put me on a path I didn't even know. But I remember saying to my colleagues and friends, I said, I don't like being prosecuted, but in some ways I'm very lucky to be the one, because almost anyone else would say, this is dumb, just settle it, or this isn't worth it. And so, although it was in some ways very punishing, how lucky it was that it was me rather than someone who said, oh, just throw 10 grand at it, make it go away. And so,
exactly.
And so here I am. And Manny, I tell you honestly, we just wanted to go and cover the debate. That's why we applied. We did not want them to say no to us, and we did not want to have to sue to get in. We did not want the burden. We just wanted to do journalism here. But they brought the fight to us, and I say again, in some strange way, I'm not going to call that luck, but I feel sometimes, Manny, I feel like a strangely shaped puzzle piece, and every once in a while, maybe once every 10 years, I fit perfectly into a puzzle. And I think it was that way with the Danish cartoons of Mohammed, and it may be here because this bigger judicial inquiry, a judicial review of the debate commission, I think it will expose a lot of things. It'll expose internal communications, emails, memos, maybe even notes from phone calls that would have otherwise been hidden. And I think if we can expose how the Trudeau government works and how they try to interfere with the media and debates, I think that's very useful to the country to see. I feel like I have a sense of mission here, man, even though I know it's going to cost us more than 100 grand to see this thing through.
Ezra, I'm going to tell you something very simply. If I was legal counsel for the government, knowing what Justin Trudeau has done, and I say corrupted every institution, and you will find those emails. You will find the connection and the direction by the government to the independent debates commissioner. If I were them, I would be doing the very same thing as they did with the Admiral Norman case. I'd be sending you a huge offer and getting you to sign an NDA and getting you out of my life, because you are going to do more harm to what the government has done to Canadians and destroying what we cherish the most, and that is our precious institutions. I mean, to see the clerk of the Privy Council, to see our military, to see the Attorney General, and Ezra, nothing bothers me more than seeing the Attorney General and the Public Prosecutor's Office directed by the PMO, Ezra. And I'm going to tell you this. Even if they offer you $10.5 million, don't sign the NDA.
Well, Manny, if they were going to offer me money and a bribe, I'm sure they would have done it by now. We've been a pain in their side. And we have made a moral decision here at the Rebel not to take government money. I remember even at Sun News, I got an access to information document from the CBC. I was criticizing the CBC so much, their vice president actually asked in an internal email, can we just hire off Ezra? Like they thought I was a problem. They said, just hire him. That's the government instinct. There's a problem, hire him, buy him off, throw money at him. Manny, I'm 47, almost 48. I've chosen the path in my life. It's a path of being a dissident. Sometimes that's a stressful path, and it's certainly not a lucrative path. But if this is, I mean, obviously I'm not in the same kind of jeopardy that Vice Admiral Mark Norman was. My life is not being ruined in the same way his was.
Right.
But if I have the ability to expose the wrongdoings of this government, I feel like I have an obligation to see it through. Like I say, it's one of those once every 10-year moments where this strangely shaped puzzle piece called Ezra Levant maybe fits the occasion. So
Well,
go ahead.
Ezra, you are the person. I mean, of course, when we saw what you did 10 years ago with the Human Rights Commission, maybe you are the person, because I sit, I'm retired, and I see, Canada is great, not because necessarily of its government, but because of its institutions. I've seen almost every institution corrupted. There are reports that Environment Canada has changed certain data. Right. Every institution has been corrupted, and we are Canadians and the person that protects our institutions was the clerk of the Privy Council. Unprecedented. Never in Canada's history did he resign in shame because of what appears to be an apprehension of bias. When our institutions fall, Ezra, Canada falls. Yeah. And we need to have, and you know what? You're Atlas. You're carrying that world on your shoulders.
Well, you're praising me too much, my friend, and perhaps I spoke too much in my own defense. But I'm just trying to come to terms and trying to wrap my head around what we're getting into, because it's all happened so fast. And but I think I have to get my strength, because if we go forward, it's going to be a brutal fight. Mark Norman was out of pocket hundreds of thousands of dollars. He relied on crowdfunding, and I'm sure his lawyer gave him some terms to pay. He was at great risk financially.
Sure he was.
Let alone his liberty. Like, theoretically, he could have faced prison, I think.
Sure.
So I'm certainly not in the jeopardy he was, but I appreciate you giving me confidence.
But he wasn't. But Ezra, Mark Norman wasn't trying to save the institutions of Canada. Right now, you have, I love this country. This is the greatest country in the world, and because of its cherished institutions and its rule of law, and our charter. And it is being chipped away. Freedoms are being chipped away. Freedom of speech, freedom. I mean, so I've watched under this government. I mean, the institutions under Harper were strong and challenged him. And that gave us a great government and great institutions. Right. The institutions under Justin Trudeau have capitulated, and it's become a dictatorship. And Canadians have nothing to protect them against a terrible government, a tyrannical government, and our institutions need to be saved. And you know what, Ezra? Somebody tapped you in the shoulder and said, "Okay, buddy, it's your turn. You better do it."
Well, you've got me revved up, Manny, and I thank you for the pep talk. And I'm going to show this video to our lawyers, and they might even, I know you're not practicing law anymore, but they might even give you a phone call and bounce some ideas around.
No, you know what? I love ideas. I mean, I was a creative lawyer, and I think, number one, you go hard on the costs because, when I look at this case and I see that they sat and they gave you the decision and they downloaded the decision to the government and they deprived you, and you sat there and spoke for every journalist. And every journalist should be sending you champagne and saying, thank you very much for protecting our and to me, Ezra, there's a lot of great institutions. I'm a lawyer. I believe the rule of law and our legal system is the greatest institution. But let me tell you, journalism is right there next to law. And without a strong legal system and a strong journalism, journalistic integrity, we have no Canada. So, you're both a lawyer and you're both a journalist, and so you understand it, and you're fighting, and every journalist should hang their hat in shame for not being there with you, and they should be the first people that should be funding your appeal and your continued. I suggest that you direct a letter to them. Here's what the judge highlight to a clause. This is what I've done for you. I now need your help. Be there as an intervener. Be there as a financial contributor. It is for you that I'm speaking.
Yeah, that's a great advice. Well, Manny, you've certainly raised expectations. I've got to live up to them now. You've given me too much praise, but you've given me a lot of encouragement. I'm going to take it to heart. That's a good idea to try and get these media organizations to join us. Late they come, but that's better late than never. Manny, you've given me so much to think about. You've made me think about this case as more important than just the momentary barrier we were trying to get through. This is a larger thing that goes to the rule of law, independence of institutions, and a bit of a institutional rot that I think Trudeau has set in. So I thank you for this, and you've got my head buzzing with ideas now, and we're going to go do it, Manny.
Thank you, buddy, and that's great. And I tell you, even the people that don't want this to happen are there in your corner, and I think it'll be wonderful for Canada.
Well, thank you, and I accept your charge. I accept your challenge, and God help us all. Thank you, my friend.
All right, take care.
All right, there you have it. Manny Montenegrino, a great friend and advisor and commentator, former senior lawyer, former Prime Minister's lawyer, and always a great political conversation. I will take to heart his message to me today. That's an excerpt from the Ezra Levant Show, which is a show I do every day. I do a monologue, interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. But you've got to subscribe to it, which you can do at premium.rebelnews.com.